Nation in Conversation, in proud partnership with Senves, Bayer, Engine, Nedbank, Agri, Grain SA and John Deere, in association with Hinterland and Isuzu.
Welcome to Nation in Conversation from Nampo Harvest Day. Today we talk about the youth, about career opportunities, about the variety of functions that's all linked to agriculture. I've got a very distinguished young panel. I think for the first time this week I'm the oldest person on the panel, I think, which is exciting. But Ikageng, I'm going to start with you. How did you end up in agriculture? Give us a bit of background.
Thank you, Theo. I think my experience runs from when I was younger. You know, my great-grandmother used to plant a piece of land, and growing our own food was a way of life. And then as I grew and went to school, I was exposed to agriculture again in high school, right? And that's where I understood the different aspects of agriculture and how I can play a role. And going to varsity and so forth, that's where I decided to take it up and just continue.
What did you study at varsity?
I actually studied agricultural economics. I did it in my undergrad as well as my postgrad. So I did a master's, and it was in agribusiness.
And now where are you now?
I'm currently at Grain South Africa, which is a farmers association, and I work as an economist there. So we work with the grain economy.
Jacqueline, how did you end up in agriculture?
Hello, Theo. Thank you. Well, I actually married a farmer.
No choice.
Now, I studied CA, and I thought, well, there's a great big world out there. I did my articles in the city. But when we married and moved to the farm, I thought, well, the only place for me is one of the auditing firms. And while working there, we audited NWK, and I saw a lot of opportunities there.
NWK is one of the bigger agriculture companies in the Northwest Province.
Yes. So I got an opportunity there, and I've been working in the internal audit department there. And there's a lot of opportunities for young professionals, for educated people. We always think it's only agri and farming and agriculture, but it's not. It's CAs, it's internal auditors. There's a lot of opportunities in the agri sector.
And you find that do people sometimes think of agriculture in too narrow terms?
Yes, definitely. I mean, just in the last 3 to 6 years, we've appointed so many young professionals, risk management students, people that can help us with business intelligence, can help us with fraud prevention plans. So there's a lot of opportunities for people that studied towards financial degrees as well in the agricultural sector.
We've talked about, Peter, financial degrees. Your background and the company you're involved in, finance is not really the focus here. Give me a background. How did you end up in agriculture, and give us a bit of an idea of the different opportunities that you view working for a multinational company?
Yes. Yeah, Theo, so my personal background, I don't come out of a farming family, but I always had a passion for it. So when I decided to go and study, I studied primary science as a degree. And that is how I got into the company I work for today as a scientist in product development. Now, if you look at the scope of a company like Bayer, under our crop science division, it starts with product development. That is, you start with pure science, from chemistry, genetics, genetic breeding, molecular breeding. So then you basically start with pure science, you develop a product, you test the product, you get into a regulatory space. This is where you start moving into legal terms, international trade, all those type of things, which you will never have thought would be a part of agriculture. Once you have a product, it's been developed, it has been deregulated, now you need to get that product into the hands of a farmer so that he can use to produce food. And then you start moving into things like logistics, supply chain, production, engineering, all those type of things then starts to play a role. Then you start to market that product. And marketing today is in agriculture have changed so much over the past few years. Everything is now with how can we service the farmer better? How can you link the farmer with your supply chain? How can you link your farmer with your value chain? So understanding that, business intelligence, all those things, and then the big one today is big data, right? Data analytics, predictive analytics, all those things then comes into play. And then, of course, at the end of the day, you need to get the product onto the farm. And this is even where finance starts to play a role in how do you finance the farmer? How do you ensure that that product flows into a value chain at the end of the day? So it's a totally, I mean, it's so broad, we can spend 3 hours just on that.
Can I perhaps just go to the end of that, what you talk about, big data, and the area of precision farming? What skills is involved in developing and maintaining that side of the business?
That side of the business. And I think the skill set that we have seen from primary agriculture have changed so much. Over the, I mean, in a matter of 10 years' time, big data are starting to play such a big role. So firstly, today you measure so many things. So beginning from measuring systems and you know, building a data set. The thing is, you can have so much data, but now you have to do something with it. And this is where data analytics comes in. So it's from IT, developing basically your systems that can manage that data, your more hardware type of development in your measuring systems. Then you get into data analytics, programming, at the end of the day, a feedback loop back to your, to make decisions. So, so much things have changed, and it's all becoming a digital IT world that we are starting to move in, and developing and using that data properly.
Tianda, what was your route?
Okay. Firstly, I'd like to say thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I studied journalism. And for me, when I left varsity, I went to do my internship at the Weekend Post. And at that time, I was still trying to find my feet, to find out what is it that I can actually do, because when you are a journalist, you dab into different subjects. So I was like, okay, fine. I'm not sure what I want to focus on at that time. So people will be like, but you like politics. You're good at politics, so you must follow politics. I will be like, no, you're good at fashion. And I was like, actually, I learned myself, and I was like, actually, I'm more a developmental person. So after my internship, I was like, actually, I want to do something within the Eastern Cape. I wanted to do like a documentary in the Eastern Cape about what could grow the province itself. And I was like, it's actually agriculture. So I wanted to do something in agriculture. That's how I stumbled into agriculture. But then I didn't end up doing that a documentary at that time. But then through the exposure that I had of learning about writing about the environment itself, I ended up getting into another internship with the Department of Environment. So from that background, I stumbled into the agriculture, because we used to do more, we used to be more involved with land issues. So that's when I ended up into how
That's
I
when it started to link
together. And it was more the environment and how the environment links up with agriculture, because when I was in the environmental sector, it was more about how agriculture is basically taking up more land and taking up more resources, and then where the environmental side is trying to save the environment. So for me, it was how do we balance those two sectors. That's how I got into agriculture. But when I got into agriculture, starting to learn about the agricultural sector itself, it was not about now I'm here to balance the two, in the environmental sector and the agricultural sector. I started learning more about the whole value chain. Just a small thing, just looking at one commodity, just planting, let's say maize. The work that goes behind from the research of getting that seed until it gets to
your plate.
My plate. So the whole value chain itself, I've learned a lot from being an agriculture.
Pascal, your route? You're a regular contributor, or how many years have you been coming to Nampo?
I've been coming to Nampo for the past 5 years, if I'm not mistaken, and it has just been like a place where I wish to be many years ago.
How did your route, how did your path go?
Let me start by saying, Theo, I had a love and passion for agriculture from back home in Limpopo. And then I never thought of myself being where I am today. But I think I was just taken by the love and the dream of the passion I have in agriculture. When I left Limpopo, I went to Pretoria in TUT, and I started my commercial mixed farming diploma. And then from there, I did my BTech. I got involved in many agricultural companies, like the Potato SA. I worked with Lima Rural Development. I worked with lots of supported developmental projects where I was giving like support and advisory to the developing farmers. And after about 8 years, Theo, I realized that I really need to get a change in my life, and I don't want to be working in the field anymore. I joined Santam, where I was doing crop insurance. It was very interesting for me to move into corporate sector. That's today, only last year, and I joined Engine, looking after business for fuels. I never thought that there would be this kind of an opportunity, but for me, studying crop insurance, crop production in TUT, I never thought of myself becoming an agribusiness development manager sitting in Engine. Currently, I'm looking after the business of cooperations. We supply them with fuels, we supply them with loops, and you can actually do whatever you like. It's all about, if you want to be in agriculture, the space is there.
Peter, what for me was interesting a while ago, and you guys were involved in it, where a company related to agriculture owns something like 60 drones. And the drones is part of agriculture, which one would never have thought. Where does that fit into it, and why is a drone important in agriculture?
Yeah, so Theo, that's a totally new world that's busy opening up for us, along with satellite imagery, hyper spectral imagery. It's technology that's been developed. It was actually, I think, developed for a totally different purpose, and now we are busy applying it so much in agriculture. So if you take the advantage which these images bring us, so in terms of high spectral type of imagery, satellite imagery using drones, so what you can do now with this technology is you can detect issues before you can visually see it with your eyes. So now you can start looking at risk management. You can go and if you pick up a problem in a field, you can go and address that problem before it has an impact on your production. And you'd use it. We use it for product development as well, because it's not always that you can physically see the differences between different varieties or different hybrids or different treatments. But with this technology, you can now pick up small differences, which at the end of the day, these small things can create a bigger production for us, and that's where we talked about sustainability, better water use efficiency, all those type of things. It plays a role, and now we have that technology, and we are applying that technology, which is totally unrelated to agriculture. Now we can use it for a better purpose.
I saw one of these presentations, a drone company, and I was just impressed by the simple logic, but the effect of it, where a drone would fly over a field that was that had a pivot irrigation system on, and simply the drone would automatically send a message to a control room and say that nozzle 4 produces less water than the other nozzles. And you can't see it with your eye.
Yeah.
But one of the drone measurement instruments can pick up a color difference in a circle. And obviously that's one of the nozzles is there's something wrong. So fix it now before anything happens. Ikageng, what excites you about agriculture? Why are you excited about the field?
Theo, I think what excites me about agriculture is the opportunities that lie within agriculture. I mean, everybody needs to eat, right? And I think it's something that we overlook as people. And especially because we don't appreciate, or maybe people don't get to appreciate what happens within agriculture. But for me, I would say the ability to feed people, the ability to be able to contribute towards food security, for me, it really excites me.
And you believe if it wasn't for agriculture, we'd sit here hungry, naked and sober.
Exactly.
If Sianda, if you look from the position of a journalist, obviously part of your job is to inform, but part is also to look at the risks. When we hear about the talk about agriculture and the fact that it's become in certain areas the risks are highlighted instead of the opportunities, how do you feel about that?
For me, it's a matter of how those opportunities are presented to the people, which is something that the sector is really trying to push right now, to present these opportunities that are there and that are happening. For instance, if you look at the partnerships that are being created in the sector right now, to show that the sector can actually grow together. If you look at the land reform models, for instance, that have been reported on, that have failed in the past from the government sector. But if you look at how the commercial farmers and the emerging farmers have created land reform models that will be able to work for them. That's for me, from my perspective, that's what excites me about.
And there's the
opportunities there. There's opportunity for growth because people are coming together to work together to show that we can grow as a sector.
From your side, Jacqueline?
Yes, I agree. I think there's a lot of opportunities with regards to land reform. And I think, like you said, commercial farmers and developing new and upcoming farmers can work together in joint ventures and partnerships. And I think our farmers, our existing farmers, have to be open-minded for those new opportunities. But it is exciting because there's more opportunities still to come after all the policies have been finalized. But what excites me about agriculture at the moment is that there's a lot of new departments. If I see in NWK, there's a need to comply to King. There's a need for corporate governance. So our internal audit departments and risk management departments have become more important, and we need educated people to help us to implement those new departments. We touched on risk management a little bit earlier, but we just spoke about the farmers' risk management. But in our companies, it's also becoming more important to identify those risks in our companies before it's a problem, and putting the controls in place to address them. And also data analytics, like you said earlier, it's becoming more important for the companies to understand their clients better, to see where there's a gap in the market and to address it as soon as possible. So fraud prevention plans I also mentioned a little bit earlier. Because there's so much crime and fraud in our country and in our companies, we have to focus on that. There's a lot of opportunities for young, educated people in the agricultural industry these days.
Yeah, I'd like to add to what Jacqueline is saying, looking at the risks, because now we've been told that there's always reports about how the agricultural sector is struggling to produce with less resources, and we have to produce more food for the growing population. Those challenges that we're facing right now in terms of climate change, and in terms of climate change, for example, I'll just use climate change. Those are opportunities. All the challenges that we see can be turned into opportunities where the young people then can be brought into the sector to be able to learn and see how these challenges can be then mitigated.
And can be addressed. And that obviously, if there is a challenge or a problem, that means there's opportunities for people in that space.
Yes.
Either to manage, to mitigate, or at least to understand the problem.
Yes, and the good thing about it is that now we're not looking at you have to have studied science or physics or whatever. You can be an accountant, you can be, it's a broad spectrum, you can be in IT, you can be different fields. So if we look at agriculture as a business itself and look at all the opportunities that are there, then. Yeah.
How has the business changed of agriculture since you've been involved? What is the major changes that you're seeing in the trends, Pascal?
Theo, I think a lot is happening in agriculture in South Africa. Agriculture plays one of the big role, especially in our economy. It's contributing a lot to our GDP, and economic growth. We are experiencing a lot of what you call droughts in South Africa, but it's one of the sector or industry that is also growing faster at a faster rate. As you are talking about technology in agriculture coming through, and they are welcoming the technology, and it's going to play a bigger role, and lots of things are going to start to blossom in agriculture. From now, everything looks like it's good. Things are happening positively, and it's one of the sector, if South Africa we can protect, we can actually generate lots of jobs out of agriculture, and it's also a primary, it's a primary core function for South Africa for to generate food security, and also provide us with clothes and other stuff.
I'm going to allow a few questions now. I think we've had some nice comments. Perhaps just 2 points from that I think that one should keep in mind, and that is the agriculture value chain. That means, and let's take maize, from putting the seed in the soil to getting the product on the plate. That value chain has opportunities, as we talked about, but the key for me from that value chain is the value chain as it is now was described, the first time I read about it was described in 1958 by 2 Harvard professors. That value chain to a large extent looks the same today. It's not going to look the same in 5, 10 or 20 years. And it's not going to change in the way we expect it's going to change. It's going to change in different ways, just like the technology changed the way we find a place. If you look Google Maps or Waze, we don't use the same technology. You don't see an old map in a car. I was coming here, what for me was incredible is that on the way here, I looked at Waze, and Waze said to me, IT system sitting in America, said to me that at the T-junction on the Viljoenskroon Road, there's a speed cop. I thought, how the hell did you know this? And as I approached, I slowed down, and there the guy was. He was sitting next to me. Now, how did the IT much company in San Francisco know there's a speed cop on the road between Nampo, on the T-junction, on the road to Viljoenskroon? How did this guy know? But there was a speed cop sitting next to the road. And he was exactly where he should have been. I don't know if he's been there for weeks, but he was The other point is, if I drive in Joburg, it'll all of a sudden tell me, turn right here. And later I found out there's a problem with a traffic light 2 kilometers down the road. How did they figure it out? Now, that kind of change we will also see in agriculture. People will jump the value chain. People will change the value chain, not from A, B, C, D, E, but from A to E. I have a colleague in Johannesburg who every Friday decides what he's going to braai, every Thursday afternoon decide what he's going to braai on the weekend. So he'll have a T-bone steak on a Friday evening. He will have a boerewors on Saturday, and Sunday a roast. And on Friday afternoon at the office, a cooler box arrives. Exactly what he wants. And where does it come from? It comes directly from a farmer, in his case now from the Natal Midlands. So he orders exactly what he wants, get it. So what does he cut out? He cut out 3 or 4 people in the value chain.
Middleman.
He jumped the value chain. And technology is going to change that. It's going to allow different people to trade with different ways and information to flow differently. Dieter, can we take a few questions? Is there at this point a few questions? Yes, sir. I'm going to take 2 or 3 questions at a time if there is 2 or 3 questions. Yes.
Thank you. Johan Besaident from NWK. If I took the last 5 or 6 years in our company and you see the development that has taken place and the younger people coming in, I mean, we developed the app for the farmers. I mean, but we didn't develop it on our own, and I think that's a critical point as well. We develop it with the farmers, what are their needs. And today, most of the young farmers and I think Jacqueline will assist on this, they can't live with it anymore. They've got all their data. As soon as they drop that load of maize, they get a notification, 30 tons, grade 1, enterprise, and even he can say which land was it, what was the earning on that land, and so we can trace it back to 2 years ago, and the next year that land will lay over, and so we can just farming smarter, because I think at the end of the day, as we as companies, we don't manufacture products, but we must bring the new technology to the farmers, and we must be more effective, and that's the way. I mean, like in the risk assurance, one of the topics on the risk is climate change. Never in your life, 20 years ago, agricultural companies will have one of the risks as drought and the change in the climate. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a nice perspective. And that was obviously developed by different people with different skills who would never have thought that they will end up in agriculture. And now it's for the farmer as important as his tractor on his farm. Yes.
First of all, I would like to make a comment. Theo, I think you've got a moral responsibility to share that technology with all of us who's often on the road. I would dearly love to know where they
saves
are
a lot of money.
hiding. I can imagine. I will save a lot of money. And then, on the other hand, it's very encouraging to see these young people taking off where we older ones are soon going to leave off or are going to exit the industry. I would like to ask them how they believe, or what can the broader agricultural community do or sector to get closer to the consumer?
Great question. Great question. Is there another question? Oh, now there's a lot of hands. I'm going to take this question here and that question, these two, and then we will come back to you guys in the next round. This question and that question over there. Yes.
Hi, good morning. I'm Izan. I'm from Soil in the Western Cape. My question is, currently in the canola industry, the biggest problem is new cultivar technology. When we compare ourselves with countries like Canada and Australia, we are far behind. Yes, Peter, this is for you. We are far behind. Also herbicides, etc. I would just like to know, is there a solution? What is the solution? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And one more question over there, the lady there.
Excuse me, I'm just going to read it because I'm scared I'll lose my train of thought. But I wrote here, at the beginning, it was mentioned that there's a lot of opportunity specifically for skilled people within the agricultural industry. And when we look at the agricultural economy and the economy as a whole, we know that employment and agriculture are key elements in economic growth. So my question is, what would you suggest as a possible solution to closing the gap between commercial and subsistence farming practices? How can we implement a system where we, the people who have the necessary skills, can serve as a bridge to offer opportunities to those who haven't really got these opportunities yet, so that we can prevent a technological gap from arising within the agricultural industry?
Thank you. I'll get to the other questions in the next round. So the 3 points here, I think, is the point of getting the farmer or the producer closer to the consumer. The second point is specifically about canola, but I think the broader question with that is about the development and what's happening and where we are on that. And then the last question is the gap in terms of how do we create and get more people to successfully close the gap between the various interests into the market. So I am going to start with the consumer question, and I'm going to ask Jacqueline to think a bit and Pascal to think a bit about that. But let's start with Peter, because I think and I'm going to ask specifically the economist and the journalists about closing that gap, because both refer to that in their discussion. So Peter, can you start with with a question that started off with canola but went into the field of
Yep.
research, development.
Yes, Theo, yeah, that's a very important question, and it's not just a South Africa specific or a canola specific issue. It's actually broader than that. Now, one thing that have happened over the past few years is that we are now in this global world, and that's where the answer will lie. Today, if you look at how technology have changed and how easy it is to link up with, for instance, breeding programs on canola, for instance, with Australia, or even with Europe, and data is allowing us now to go and match areas in South Africa to other areas in the world with similar climate conditions, similar soils, and all of these things, and then pull out of that resources across the globe. So that's where the answer is at this stage, is to set up these networks, and it's usually the input companies that starts that process, with a drive, of course, from a farmer organizations like Grain SA, where you start off and you need to build this link across the globe. And start testing and start screening for improved genetics, and similarly with chemistry, crop protection as well. It's the same thing. We need to build this global network and start leveraging on that, and not try and do everything ourselves. So I would say that's where the answer lies.
Let's also just, can you address a bit the challenges in terms of currently going through a process of testing of new technology, the hurdles to get new technology on the ground?
Yes, yeah. So of course you need to start off with the demand, right? There must be a demand for new technology in a market. Once the demand have been identified and your scale of that demand have been determined, and this is again where data analytics and those things comes in. Once you have that scale, that business case really, then you need to start going into the regulatory system. Now that's one challenge I think that we need very smart minds to come and help us with, is how can you standardize regulatory needs across the globe, because every country have different regulatory requirements as to how do you introduce a new technology, a new chemistry into the market. And then you start that deregulation process, and that can take many years, depending on what you need, the hurdles that you need to go through. Once you have crossed that, you have checked it in terms of your environmental safety, your consumer safety, all of those things, then the product can eventually reach to the market. But I think at this stage, that's one of the challenges that we need some innovative ways to come and standardize this regulation and legislatory type of processes, policies, to get a little bit of a quicker move into that system.
If we will look at the question around the commercial farmers, the highly efficient, highly effective commercial farmers, and the fact that it is paramount important for South Africa to get more people into farming, productive farming, sharing the wealth of farming, how does one go about bridging that gap?
Theo, looking at, I think firstly we need to acknowledge, well, the difference, you know. A smaller guy would have specific needs compared to your commercial guys. But what I have noted that works best is partnerships. The ability of your commercial guy to be able to mentor the smaller guy to come up, to introduce him to the newer technology, to introduce him to different mechanisms in which he can be able to do his farming, goes a very long way. So I believe that partnerships would be the best way to go about bridging the gap between your commercial space as well as your developing space.
What for me, see, and I'm going to ask your comment on this. What for me is always interesting, when you talk about technology, and I'm using technology here in the widest definition, either if it's in the plant, if it's in the equipment, if it's in the IT, in the widest variety of things. For a big commercial farmer, technology makes small differences. It's 1% here and 2% there. But for some of the new entrants, a bit of technology makes a massive difference. It can double or triple the yield. And then it doesn't even have to be the latest technology. It must be just be quality technology in terms of the quality of the input, the quality of the know-how, the quality of the data. How do we transfer that?
Okay. Like to reiterate on something that she touched on in terms of the needs. You know. A smaller farmer would have, as you're saying, the needs will be different for a commercial farmer to a smaller farmer. And in conferences that I've attended, there's always talks about how does the sector help the smaller farmer. And there's been apps that have been created specifically to the smaller farmer, companies like Solidaridad. This would be examples maybe that have been used in other African countries, brought into South Africa, or in South Africa going to other African countries as well. So specific needs to the apps that have been created.
So it's information and access to information.
Access to information.
Theo, maybe just to link up on that, and that is today what we see specifically to that question. The best technology that you can apply to bridge that gap between a smallholder subsistent type of farmer and a commercial farmer is using mobile technology. Especially in Africa, where you have seen a very high rate of adoption of mobile technology, we are seeing leapfrogging in terms of technology, where you have nothing, you have no infrastructure, you have quite rural areas, and suddenly with the adoption of mobile technology, you see those farmers jump many steps in terms of the adoption of technology. So I would say the answer there lies in making use of mobile technology, apps, and even basic feature phone type of applications to bridge that gap between the skills, the people that know how, and the ones that still needs to learn that and to transfer that technology.
Theo, for me, I've been involved in agricultural development and support for quite a long time. I learned so many things. Dynamics are too much there. I think we don't have our government does not have the proper model to fund developing farmers.
The model has proven not to work.
It doesn't work. They must try to establish certain things that are going to suit agriculture. The same procurement procedure that they are following in Department of Health is the same procedure that applies in Department of Agriculture. And the same procurement model they are using for Department of Education is still the same.
Yeah.
In agriculture, we work in seasons.
Yeah. It's different.
Yes. When you start planting in August, the seed must be there.
In August.
In August, it must be there. It must not be ordered. It must be there.
Yeah. And there's timelines and things that need to happen.
Everything must be done accordingly. Then there are so many things that are not being done correctly because of some of the things you have learned, that it's lack of agricultural backgrounds.
Yeah.
People think that farming is just sitting in your office, having lots of tractors, lots of big farms and everything. There was a saying in Afrikaans that broedery is near matras op the leg. You can't just sleep and expect to be rich tomorrow.
There's something, it is a hard
It's a hard work. I worked at the farm before in the Eastern Cape. When you are planting and the season is about to close, you start the tractor 4 o'clock in the morning, dot until 11 o'clock. Yeah. Planting in the middle at night.
It has to be done
It
now.
has to be done and be finished now. You can calculate that I'm not going to be able to reach 300 hectares that I want to plant before the end of this week, but I must plant. You get an additional tractor, you plant throughout the day and night.
It has to be done.
It has to be done.
And
but
there's timelines on that.
Yeah, people, I'm tired.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's no weekends.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, I want to add to that. I think it is important to remember that the next generation on a farm has a lot of knowledge. They grew up with their father being on a tractor, working at night, like you said.
Yes.
They understand the risks. They understand that you don't always make money every year. Sometimes you don't even break even.
Yes.
And that's a way of life. It's not just your business and
Yes.
your livelihood. It's a way of life. And your whole family and all your savings goes into that farm. And that's why I think it is important that there should be initiatives where developing farmers and subsistence farmers and commercial farmers can work together in partnerships and maybe in joint ventures. Because we have to transfer that knowledge to the new generation and to the developing farmer that doesn't have all that knowledge. And sorry, I just want to add also, for the small farmer, it's the small business, it's becoming more and more difficult to survive. We see that the farmers that are surviving are the ones that are going big and are expanding their businesses more and more. And it's because of economies of scale. They can't always afford the technology, like we said. There is apps and all that, but they can't always afford the technology to do more with less.
But that comes back to the model. We need to review the model.
Yes.
I'd like to add, in terms of the technologies that we're talking about now, for instance, seed technology. Commercial farmers who have been using for years GMOs, and small farmers are only now catching up on using GMOs, and this is only in South Africa. But now using GMOs is also moving into Africa as well. So African maize farmers are able to now will be able to use now GMOs. But these are just talks. But it's a good thing that the sector is actually trying to make sure that the small farmers are able to also move to the direction of the commercial farmer. And
how do we get the consumer and the farmer closer together? Anybody would like to venture? The journalist.
I think it's more on the communication of food, because I mean you get all these adverts that are out there about food, but you never get an advert about where the food comes from. You need to educate the consumer about where their food
Woolies
comes
doesn't
from.
own chickens.
But then they need to tell the farmer where that chicken still comes from. Doesn't matter where they own it, but they need to give them the background of
Do you
where
think
the
it's
food comes
communication?
from. The communication.
Yes, I highly agree with her. I think it's all about the message that is being sent out there, especially like through the advertisement and media. I think if they can get that one right, people will really understand where does this come from.
Yeah, Theo, I always say, you know, our farmers in South Africa is some of the best in the world. The one thing that they are not so good at is marketing themselves. That's one thing I think that we are lacking, is that communication, knowing where your food comes from, knowing where it's produced, and I think we need to work harder as a sector in marketing that for the consumer to understand where does it come from.
I was just interesting. I was a while ago in Holland, and if you buy meat, there's a barcode, and you can go to a counter in the supermarket, and there's a picture of the farm and the family where this meat originated from. So you can actually scan it, and you get the picture of the farmer, his wife and his 2 kids, and a picture of the homestead where it comes from. Now, how close can that link be? Secondly, I believe there's a movement in some countries where supermarkets and retailers will have a specific sticker on the produce if it was produced within 20 kilometers of the town. So if you buy in Botawil chicken, you can actually go to the store and say, I want it within 20 kilometers of Botawil. Okay. And the aim of that is to increase local production, local awareness, and link it to area, to the farmer. But I think so the aim perhaps is communication. I think also there's a lack of understanding of the complexity to get that chop on your plate and get it backwards. But I think the best is probably communication. As Peter said, farmers are good at a lot of things, but not at communication.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to take some questions. Over there was a few questions. Just re-raise your hands. Yes, thank you. Okay, I'll go. While the mic is moving up, let's take this one to save time.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Richter de Beer from Worcester, Westphalia. I would just like to know, a report written by the Parliament Monitoring Group in 9 May 2018 had a statistics that said in 1993 that there was roughly 60,000 farming units, and in 2007 there was only 40,000 units reported. Is that better for South Africa or worse, and why?
We'll get to that question. That's a nice, difficult question. Oh, thank you very much. There was the questions over there. Can we get the mics up there at the back? Oh, he's got a mic. There is one there, and then refer it back to the person behind you once you've done that. Yes. Yes, you can go.
You guys mentioned something about special substructures that you can have, right, within a farming enterprise in order to improve efficiency of production, having different skills that are integrated, like, for example, computer sciences, making use of stuff like artificial intelligence in order to improve efficiency within a farming structure. Now, referring back to that issue in terms of production, there are many challenges that face agriculture that sometimes, even attempting to mitigate those, you can have a subsequent increase in end product pricing, commodity being quite expensive. So my question is this: filling those gaps, like integrating risk economists and internal auditors and all of that stuff within a farming enterprise, especially for commercial wise, how will that impact commodity pricing, especially seeing that different challenges have been posed with changing times, climate change, and so forth?
Great question again. One at the back there.
Hello, my name is Brent Yammer. I'm from the University of the Free State. I would just like to hear, how can we change the perspective of youth members to get involved in agriculture? Because I'm doing my master's on youth participation in agriculture, and as you interview the respondents, you can see that the youth is not really interested in agriculture due to their perception of agriculture. So I would just like to hear, what can private institutions like your engines and all those guys do to get the youth involved in agriculture? Thank you.
Thank you. Can I perhaps, once you've done your study, would you mind sending it to the agricultural bodies like Grain SA, because, or Agri SA, because it is important to make agriculture sexy. We need to get more people that want to be involved. So I will share a few ideas, but a great question. Let's first start with a question about commercial farm numbers reducing. Anybody would like a comment? Jacqueline?
Yes, I think we see that the average age of farmers are increasing. I think it's around 60. And I mean, that's when the average person goes on pension. And then the number of farmers are decreasing. And it's definitely not a good thing, because the population is growing, so we need more farmers, we need more food. So it's definitely, we have to, like you said now, we have to make agriculture more attractive and sexy. And I think what contributes to this is all the challenges that farmers are facing at the moment, the droughts and the crime rate in South Africa, and the political instability and the uncertainties regarding land reform at this moment for some farmers. So I think it's definitely not a good thing, and we have to think of ways to make it more attractive for young people. And one of the ways, I think, would be to make them more aware. Like we just mentioned all year, it's not just the farmer and the agronomist that's involved in agriculture anymore. There's a broad range of careers that can be utilized in agriculture.
Pascal?
No, Theo, I think, yes, there is, I think, a decrease, because some of the farms went through restitution, and then the other thing that is contributing, people are not telling the truth sometimes. Certain farmers get liquidated. You get liquidated. If you're not making money and you owe the banks, they'll come and take everything. That is the truth that people are not coming out there to tell certain.
That's part of it.
Yes, part of the people. Farming is not, it's a business operation. People have to get loans to start farming. You have to have surety. That is why, to go back to that issue we're talking about, the issue of funding also, it's a very difficult one. We don't have a good funding model also to say, how can we stabilize a developing farmer to be able to get a loan and get a farm?
And get through the cycles.
Yes. How do you do that? We don't have a system.
Can I just, on your comment, firstly, worldwide, farming units are getting bigger on the big commercial side. So it's not the South African trend, it's a worldwide trend, number one. Number two, I think we need to be very careful on the definition of a farmer. That definition is very much a big commercial farming definition. But if you start to include small-scale farmers that are coming into producing surplus, that number will be a few 100,000. But it's a natural progression as we need to get more farmers into the system. And as we need to get more farmers to become viable, one of the Southeast Asian countries, policy at some point was saying everybody that's bigger than a gardener is a farmer. The principle is if you produce surplus, view yourself as on the road to becoming a farmer. And that will change the perception. But big commercial farmers are getting less. They're actually producing more. They're more efficient. But that's only one part of the farming value chain. Just a comment on the value chain and the costs and the structure of the value chain. Worldwide, in real terms, food is getting cheaper. And it's been a long trend that has come for a number of years. Because of that trend, however there's cost involved, but farming needs to be more efficient, needs to be more effective, and technology needs to play a bigger role. And that goes as much for the value chain as it goes for the commercial farming operation. So you have to become more efficient, more effective. A farmer's not going to lose his farm to some political party. He's not going to lose his farm to some political leader. His farm will end up with his neighbor because his neighbor's better at farming than he is. That's where farm's going to end up with. So I think the point on the value chain is that yes, there's additional cost layers, but food as a whole is becoming cheaper in real terms over long periods of time, and the farming community needs to address that.
Yeah.
Anybody would like to add a comment on that?
I think Theo, maybe on the issue of the reducing farming entities, economy of scale played a very, very big role, and also linking up to the food price at the end of the day is if your entity becomes bigger, you can start cutting cost, overhead cost, and leading to more efficiencies, that reduces your risk but increases your margins, and that's why I think a major role played in the reduction also of the amount of entities, also then leading into the adoption of technology and your food price at the end of the day, which becomes lesser. Yeah.
Any other comment on that? Can we just have that question that was asked right at the end? What was the key element of that?
How do you perceptions? How
Oh
do you
yeah,
change
yes,
the perception?
the one about how do we make farming sexy? I'll ask the ladies first.
Theo, I think it's more of trying to change perceptions and making it more fashionable. If you look at other professions, for instance, being a doctor or being an engineer, it built up over a number of years to say that this is quite interesting. We put a lot of prestige when it comes to those careers, but it's simply because of exposure, right? Young people like it more or relate to it better because it's something that they see on a daily basis. So if we can educate the society as a whole, not just the young people, society as a whole, to say that agriculture is actually a viable business, you know, and not just the farming part, but the whole value chain. To say that from farm to fork, this is what happens, and you start them at a very young age. And if you can do that, expose them and plant that seed, whether or not they end up in agriculture, they are exposed. And remember, what our parents know will influence what we know. If you grow up in an urban area and your parents were never exposed to agriculture, for instance, or your teachers for that matter, that means your perception on agriculture might just be, you know, a bit distorted. So I believe that it's a matter of educating our society as a whole for them to be able to know that it's an option, you know. You can go into agriculture and actually be a prestigious person, just like a doctor. So
And that needs to change.
it needs work.
And to add on to that, it's not really about being out in the bundus, in the bush somewhere, farming. You can actually be closer to the city. Well, not too close, but there's urban farming as well.
Yeah.
You can be an urban farmer. You can live closer to the city, still be a farmer, especially now because infrastructure is a problem if you're farming far out of the city. So farming closer to the city is actually a better option. So it's not a matter of you are out there in the bundus, you can't be closer to the people.
I think part of that challenge, and perhaps that is why we need, again, the fact that somebody is in agriculture, but he owns, he doesn't own tractors or buckies, but he owns drones. That is also part of that perception. How do you change the perception? But I do think that that kind of research, Agri SA can do with reading that research. I think it's an area we need to address. I'm going to have a last round of questions. Can we have a few hands? There's one. There's one. Okay, we'll have those two questions. One at the back and one on the side. You can go.
Hello, my name is Luzon and I'm from the Northwest University of Potchefstroom. And I just would like to ask, South Africa's agricultural sector is one of the most unprotective sectors in the world if you compare it. I just would like to know, what do you guys think the government and some of the private companies that are involved in agriculture can do to protect the agricultural sector?
Thank you. Question there. There was a, yeah.
Actually, she almost asked the same question as I was about to ask.
Great minds think alike.
But agriculture is a science and it's divided into several sectors. So in terms of the private sector and the government sector, if they were to collaborate, what opportunities lie for the youth in order to have a sustainable agriculture?
All right, I'll have just pass the mic to the back. I'll take that question as well, and then we're done for now.
I would just like to know from the panel, what can be done to educate smallholder farmers more about the technology that you guys have been talking about? Because I myself, I'm an upcoming farmer, but the first time I heard about drones and pivots and all those things is when I actually had to go work for my own funding to fund for my degree. So what can institutions like you guys do to educate the small farmer about the technology that you guys are talking about? Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I'm going to start with the protection question. The point of protecting any produce or any market is based on a set of obviously rules that South Africa is part of, but it is also a matter of what and how do you protect. So let's start with a lot of countries as infant production or infant industry protection to assist farmers to get onto scale or to assist certain areas. But on the bigger scale of things, if we want access to markets, there's always a quid pro quo in terms of how do you negotiate with various markets. And I'll give you an example. South Africa's been negotiating since 2005 free access to the Indian market. And those negotiations are still not being concluded. But the difference is usually when you start that, if you say we want free access to the market in India, India will say, but that's a great idea, can our textiles have free access to your market? So it's not as simple as just protecting or not protecting. There's a set of rules, but what protection does, and there's a handful of countries in the same area as South Africa, it always makes sure that your farming is as efficient and effective as possible. Because of the long-term protection costs the consumer. You pay more for goods and you start to get inefficiency. So although there's certain areas and certain industries that from time to time will need protection, one must be very careful not to create and sustain uneconomic, non-viable industries by protection. Anybody would like to add anything? Yes.
I'd actually like to add on that, to say that, for instance, as Grain South Africa, we sit on the Agricultural Trade Forum. And this is a platform where industry and the government sit down to say that this is what we would like to have or this is what we don't want to have. And I'd like to assure South Africa to say that there are a lot of brilliant minds behind that platform. And it means that, or actually it's more about saying we can't just leap into certain things. You know, there's a lot of red tape that goes within it. But I would just like to say that in terms of market access, we're on top of it.
I think the bigger opportunity is market access, to open markets up. And our farmers will become efficient, they will become productive, but it's about opening up new markets and broader markets than trying to protect industries that should have been more effective in certain cases. That is not a be-all and end-all answer. I also would like the question about technology and getting more people involved in knowing about technology. Your point on that, because I do think Grain SA does a lot on that.
I'm actually going to sound like a broken record, but partnerships, right? And this is, for instance, let me just make examples of what we do as Grain SA. For instance, in terms of trying to get the youth into agriculture, we have a mentorship program where youth are trained to be able to train farmers, right? And so you can imagine that it's a rigorous process in order for these people to be able to help farmers to be able to become more, I don't know, viable, right? And the frustration that I've gotten from the youth is them trying to convince the older farmers to be able to try and get to technology. Remember, us as younger people are more adaptable to technology. But for the younger generation, it takes a bit of time for them to be able to be accepting towards certain technologies. And so in as much as it takes time, I feel like the youth also help in terms of trying to bridge the gap of technology and acquainting the older generation with the more advanced technology that's available.
Unfortunately, these guys are going to kick us off the stage just now because we've run out of time. I just want to make one or two closing remarks. We talked about funding and access to funding. Don't underestimate the amount of discussions, the amount of structuring that's taking place at this point in time to create various funding models where the risk-return element will assist a new or up-and-coming farmer. These things are being put in place. These things are getting more traction than they ever have from my point or from my position. Thank you very much, everybody. I think it was a great panel, and it was actually wonderful to be the oldest member on a panel. Thank you very much. I think over the next 5 or 10 years, I certainly think there's a great future for agriculture. I think if you look at the way that the agriculture is going to be restructured, it's going to change. The opportunities will be much broader for young people to have access to funding, access to technology, and I do think there will be more viable opportunities as the value chain gets disrupted and as the funding structures get in place. And I think it's a matter of being positive, being creative, and taking part in this change. But there's not a simple answer, but it's an exciting answer. Thank you very much, and thank you for attending.
Nation in Conversation, in proud partnership with Senves, Bayer, Engine, Nedbank, Agri, Grain SA, and John Deere, in association with Hinterland and Isuzu.